How to make a Halo Infinite neck seal. Welcome to part 10 of making a Halo Infinite cosplay. This is going to be a long episode, so sit back, get your notebooks ready, and let's get on with the video. To start with, I'm going to 3D print this file made by Instinct Creative 3D. Once that's printed and you've removed all the supports, it's time to add that filler primer. If you've been keeping up with the videos, you'll know that the best method that I've found is to do 2 layers of filler primer, sand all the surfaces with 400 grit wet and dry sandpaper, 1 more coat of filler primer, and it should be looking really smooth and crisp. To add some extra detail, I'm going to use this truck bed liner, which is going to give the surface a stippled effect. You're going to spray this on with some thin, even coats, and you might want to do 2 or 3. When it goes down, it kind of looks flat and glossy. Once it's dried, it becomes more stippled and has a matte surface finish. It's really important because silicone mirrors the exact surface it's been put onto. So if you had a super shiny surface, your mold would come out looking really shiny. Now onto the main event, making the silicone neck seal. Let's run through what you need. The 3D printed mold. The silicone I went with is Dragon Skin by Smooth-On, and I make sure to get the fast curing one. This has got a pot life of 8 minutes and a total cure time of 75 minutes, which changes depending on heat and humidity. We'll be doing a couple layers of silicone, and the last 2 are going to be using this Thivex, which is a thickening agent. To dye the silicone, I'm going to be using black Silk Pig pigment from Smooth-On. You're going to need lots of gloves because this gets messy, some cheap brushes, some paper towel to clean up, plastic cups, and digital scales. Dragon Skin comes in 2 parts, which come in a blue and a yellow bottle. Before you use them, it's important that you mix them thoroughly with mixing sticks. Make sure to label those so you don't accidentally cross-contaminate the silicone. Make sure to also mix up your pigment. Now it's time to start pouring. This is going to be a 3 to 4 layer process. On the first layer, we're going to do a really thin stipple coat. For that, we're not going to need to use much silicone. So we're going to take about 5 grams of part A and B and mix them in a cup. You mix Dragon Skin with a 1-to-1 ratio, which makes measuring out really easy. I like to add the silicone pigment in before adding part B. This pigment's really strong, so you only need a really small amount, about 1 gram. Next, it's time to add an equal amount of part B. As soon as that part B is in, you're up against the clock. So you want to grab that mixing stick and get mixing. Now I want to make sure I'm using a flat-ended stick because that's going to get all the silicone mixed from the corners of the cup. Visually, I'm making sure I can see no streaks of color. I want it to be a solid black. I mixed this small batch for about a minute, which has already taken the pot life down to 7 minutes. Once you're happy that you've mixed the silicone thoroughly, grab your brush and start stippling the silicone onto the surface of your mold. This layer is known as a stipple coat, and it's all about capturing the detail on the surface, and you want to avoid building up too much thickness. This is going to help avoid bubbles in the final product. Here I'm doing a check where I'm shining against the light to make sure I've covered all the surface. If I see any dry spots, I'm going to go over that area again with my brush. Then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to set it aside to do a partial cure. Now, a partial cure is when the surface is still tacky, but it won't come off. So here you can see it's not quite ready yet. And then a couple minutes later, it's still tacky, but doesn't peel off. And then the process kind of repeats. We're going to use a little bit more silicone this time because we're going to go for a thicker layer. Once you've mixed it up, grab a brush and spread it onto the surface. This is going to be to just add some thickness to that stipple coat. Again, make sure you're covering all the surface all the way to the edge of the mold. Set it aside for another partial cure. Once it has partially cured, mix up the next batch of silicone. This time we're going to be using Thivex, which is a thickening agent. For this layer, I use a total of 50 grams of silicone. You only need to add a small amount of Thivex to the mix. This is going to allow us to give some structure to the neck seal. When you mix it together, you're going to start to see the silicone get really thick. This is going to make the silicone almost feel like a paste, which is going to help us add a lot of thickness in one layer without it running off. When applying it to the mold, make sure you're pushing it into the crevices to avoid making air bubbles. Once you've covered all the surface, smooth it off with the stick and leave it to partially cure again. It's time to do the final coat now. I'm going to use about 100 grams of silicone with the Thivex. This is just another layer to add thickness and structure to the neck seal. Silicone can be a bit tricky to work with sometimes, and you might encounter curing inhibition, which basically means that everything just stays sticky and doesn't cure. Some tips to avoid this are make sure everything you're using is compatible. I just bought everything from Smooth-On and made sure that they work with each other. There's usually a detailed description on the website that tells you that information. Now, I've not needed to use mold release, but if you do, make sure it's compatible with your silicone. And the final tip is to make sure you're working in the right temperature. Right, so after you put on that final layer, we're going to let it cure for the full 75 minutes or more if you need. We're going to make sure it's touch dry, and if it is, we're going to pull it out the mold. Grab an edge of the silicone and start peeling it away from the mold. If all has gone well, everything should have cured properly, and it will just come off really easily. In some areas with high detail, you might need to spend a bit more time slowly pulling it out. But once you got the majority of it out, you can tilt the mold on its side and push it down, and it'll just come out like this. And bam, just like that, you have your very own silicone neck seal. We're going to do a little 360 inspection to make sure there's no air bubbles and we've captured all the details. Stretching it like this can help you identify any thin areas, which you can fill by just mixing up some more silicone. We're going to neaten up the edges using a pair of scissors. So there you go, that's how you make a silicone neck seal. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed, leave a like, helps me a lot. Share it with your friends, and if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments. And that's